welcome to the LFJ podcast. I'm your host, John Freund. I'm here with Dr. Rachael Kent. This is our first video podcast, so don't freak out where we have video happening. It's amazing. New technology. We're in the 21st century. Rachael, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't we just start by just getting some brief background, why you're here. Why don't you let us in on that?
Great. Well, thank you firstly so much for having me. It's really exciting to be able to talk through the case that I've been working on and why we're having this conversation today. But largely a little bit about me then. I've been working as a researcher for about 18 years now, looking at our relationship between technology, consumer practices and health, and how that influences our everyday choices and decisions. And I've been an academic at King's now for 10 years. I'm a senior lecturer in digital economy and society. And I also founded during COVID, in the early COVID days, a business consultancy for tech wellbeing called Dr. Digital Health, which helps businesses and individuals to have a healthier relationship with their technology through evidence-based research. Through this process, I have done a lot of consultancy work in private and public sector, and also what led me to get involved in the class action that I've been leading on in the UK against Apple for coming up 5 years now. And we went to trial in the UK in January of this year. We're now awaiting judgment. But yeah, just really excited to talk to you a little bit about the case, what it means for consumers, what it means for class and collective actions. So thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what we want to discuss. And let's dive right into that. So I'm interested to know, you're leading the UK collective action against Apple. So I'm interested to know what motivated you to step into that role of class representative. Was there a personal or professional turning point that made you say, I really have to be a part of this?
Definitely. So through my PhD, as I was coming to the end of my research, I was looking very much at that relationship that we as consumers have with different tech platforms, particularly health apps and social media, and the lack of choices that were actually available to us, or the way in which choices were shaped and behavioral outcomes. So it was understanding all those platform economics, how the platform shapes what we do and don't do, what information we see and don't see, and how we purchase our apps, the consumer economic decisions that we make every day. So as that was kind of one of the latter findings of my PhD, and I began my consultancy work and trying to raise awareness and understanding of this landscape, because we are in this ecosystem, we're kind of used to it. We know we have to use, for example, Apple devices. I have to get all of my apps through the iOS App Store. And therefore, how does that shape what information I access, what choices and purchases I make? And that led me to understand a bit more about the digital economy as a whole, and particularly the Apple ecosystem, and how it's a very closed ecosystem, and it's one that takes such a high rate of commission. And so I started working with the law firm, doing this research, developing this idea around looking at Apple in this monopolistic way. They are excluding competition in the App Store market, we're arguing as part of our case. And what does that actually mean for consumers in terms of how much money or commission we're being charged unfairly due to this kind of place of dominance for them? So it was absolutely a kind of research evidence-based approach from my PhD and from my book that I was writing at the time, and then coming to, well, where do I want to actually use my research to do something impactful? As academics, impact can look like publications, it can look like podcasts, and that's amazing. But this was a real opportunity to actually make change in the ecosystem and the digital world in which we live. So it's still so exciting to me to this day. That's kind of fundamentally why I got involved.
Yeah, it's amazing. And let's dive into that core argument against Apple, because this is something a lot of people have heard for a while now, but let's really explore it. I mean, what exactly is your argument for what Apple is doing wrong, and how is that specifically impacting consumers?
Yeah, it's such a good question, because I think we'll get onto this perhaps a little bit later, but consumers perhaps aren't aware of the ecosystem that they're operating within, and certainly not the charges that they're being charged within that ecosystem. And those are fundamentally the two key strands of the case. So we're arguing that, one, Apple are dominating the App Store market on iOS devices. So we can only use the Apple App Store on these devices to access all the apps that we have to use every day to manage our lives. COVID accelerated our reliance on technology and on apps to manage everything. I can't imagine having lived through the COVID years without that tool to manage so many aspects of our lives. And that's fantastic, but that doesn't mean that there should be a lack of choice for consumers. And that's fundamentally what we're arguing Apple are doing. They're incredible innovators, but because of that monopolistic practice, it means they're excluding competition in the App Store market. And then what that means is, the second part of the claim is that they're able to charge really high, what we argue excessive rates of commission of around 30%. So 30% of everything that you buy through the App Store goes to Apple. So for every pound or for every dollar, you're looking at 33 cents, 33p. And that's huge. And we're saying that's not fair. And actually, once you are an Apple consumer and I'm surrounded here by Apple products and devices, I think Apple are a fantastic innovator. But just because you have created that ecosystem on those devices doesn't mean you can then charge these high rates. And that's the damages claim that we're seeking. So we're working on behalf of 20 million UK consumers. That's the class that we're working on behalf of, seeking around 1.5 million in damages. So that's what we've quantified as the harm to consumers on what they've lost out on as a part of having to live within this particular ecosystem.
Got it. And you are bringing this claim on behalf of millions of consumers, right? And the UK collective action regime is in its relative infancy.
Yeah.
What's really surprised you about this? Just going through this process, what's been the most surprising aspect?
What's been really surprising is pulling back the veil on these practices and making consumers aware of it, because we are living within an ecosystem that's become completely normalized under lots of arguments around security, innovation, and so on. And that's all well and good, but it's my job as class rep to actually say, well, actually, just because Apple have operated in a certain way for X amount of time doesn't mean that we have to exist within that same ecosystem when there are competitors in the market. And that is ultimately a harm. Other companies have been unable to enter the market, and therefore we can actually see how that might be detrimental to innovation. So I think that's kind of one of the things that's been really interesting and surprising. My role is just to communicate that actually in a way that makes consumers realize what their rights are. I think fundamentally, having the collective regime in its relative infancy, as you say, only since 2015, actually making consumers realize that you can hold tech giants, Apple, the richest company in the world, to account, raising awareness of that, showing a precedent being set when we feel incredibly disempowered often by the tech companies that we have to live our lives within and through. And I think that has been really surprising to kind of communicate that to the class members, journalists, podcasts, to actually kind of raise awareness of what's actually happening. Because a lot of consumers don't realize that they're paying this 30% commission, and they don't realize quite how foreclosed within this closed ecosystem they actually are.
I'm actually kind of surprised by that. A lot of consumers didn't realize that Apple was charging these very excessive rates, that there was a sort of a need for people to bring awareness of that.
Definitely. Yeah. I think it was something that before I started researching the digital economy as a whole, was unaware of the excessive rates of the commission. We're aware that obviously commission gets charged for certain payment processing services. And when we purchase an app, obviously we pay for that app, and then we have a subscription, and then we might make in-app purchases. Fine. I knew all about that, but I didn't quite realize how much of the cut that Apple were taking, and ultimately we call it the Apple tax. This 30% rate, which is huge. And I think, that was really interesting, was actually pulling back the veil on those practices. And it really did feel like that kind of light bulb moment when I was sharing it with the class members, with journalists, to actually make them, many of which who might even be kind of journalists in the tech sector or in the economic sector, who were unaware of this. So that was certainly a surprise. But that just shows how valuable and important having a collective action is, because this is what it's there for, right? It's raising awareness letting consumers know what's happening and also making them aware of the financial losses that they've suffered.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see the value right there, just on the awareness front, of course, and then forcing a sort of punitive action against a company.
Yeah.
What sort of, in bringing this action, obviously you're going up against a strong, prominent brand, one of the most prominent in the world. So what are the challenges when you're leading a claim like this? It's a very large claim against Apple. What sort of challenges that may be unique to this type of claim that you faced, and how did you navigate through those?
Yeah, so there's quite a few, so I'll try and keep this succinct. But I think, as you say, you know, Apple are the richest company in the world. We value their products so greatly. We, as consumers, have to look at the tech companies through a new lens when we're thinking about collective actions and challenging these kind of monopolistic practices, which goes against kind of what we've perhaps grown up or adopted as a normal way of living with and through our technology. So I think firstly was just navigating the legal landscape. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have any legal training or background. My expertise is in consumer practices and technology and how we interact with the tech. So it was getting my head around the collective action regime and understanding what are the kind of aspects of the case that are the most important. How can I contribute my research to that actual expertise? And making it relatable and kind of understanding to that wider audience. I think that was really, really key, was making this kind of trying to take it from a kind of legal jargon conversation and making that digestible to the everyday consumer. Navigating the legal landscape. And then I think also just the persistence and evolving nature, because the regime was, when I joined the case, it was 2019, 2020. We're only less than 5 years into it. And therefore, there's an element of the regime is evolving as we are building and running our case. So that is a process of learning with the regime as it's kind of happening. And also when I started, there was a handful of cases that were being seen before the Competition Appeal Tribunal. And now there's, you know, tens, it might be into the 50s now, of collective actions. And so that's a process of learning and evolving with it. So that's, I think, one of the things that was, and also I think specifically with the class rep role, there's not a role quite like it that I've ever experienced in my professional life or career, and it's the most intense but most exciting kind of professional experience that I've had as an academic in terms of the impact, but in terms of the having to wear different hats. You've got to be able to communicate effectively to the claim what's going on. You've got to have a level of kind of legal understanding and expertise related to the specific claim that you're working on, and then you've got to be able to stick with it and have that staying power and focus and kind of dedication throughout. And then now we're at the stage where we've had our trial, which we think went incredibly well. We're feeling very confident, especially with the recent rulings in the EU. I think it was last week, was it? In recent weeks as well, with the fines against Meta and Apple. So I think that, you know, you're working on something for 5 years. That's longer than my PhD. So you've really got to have staying power and be focused and be working with a fantastic, you know, group of people, and lawyers, of course, you know, with Hausfeld have been amazing. So it's a challenging role. It's a challenging process to be a part of it for such a long period of time. But it's certainly the most rewarding thing I've done professionally to date. So I can't think of what will top it. So, yeah.
That's terrific. So take me through, what does the success story here look like? Like, what do you hope this case achieves? Give me from both your claimants and just broader consumer rights in the UK and Europe.
Yeah. So I think success would fundamentally be getting that financial redress for the claimants, for the consumer class. That would be the kind of first thing that we would be wanting. Absolutely. That being said, I think even the process of taking Apple to trial, to court, and actually having that process of working with them and having all of the experts that we had under cross-examination and everyone involved that has to be delivering a case and a trial of this magnitude, that in and of itself is a win, because I think that signals a huge shift. precedent-setting shift in the UK of the first tech company kind of under fire, or certainly under trial. So that is, you know, regardless of what happens, that's still a win. I think that's still a fantastic outcome. But ultimately, it's that financial redress for the claimants and for the consumers class. Ultimately, the financial amount is determined by the tribunal, and they're the ones. We've put forward our case as well as we think we can, and we think we did a very, very good job of kind of really highlighting where the excessive charges are and what the power asymmetries and imbalances are, and the monopolistic practices. So it's up to them to decide what that amount would be if we were successful. I think the precedent-setting nature of it is the other part that's such a huge win, because we're looking, it's the first trial of its kind against a tech company, against a tech, not only a company giant, you know, one of the richest companies in the world. To take them to where we took them is just hugely exciting. And I think that signals, hopefully for other cases or claims or claimants, that signals a real kind of shift, and hopefully a sense of empowerment, that if somebody else who's working in this space or another law firm who's researching this sees other anti-competitive practices, that would encourage them to also hold them to account. And I think that it signals that kind of wider global shift to the tech companies, the tech giants. You can't not be held accountable. You are being held accountable now. You've operated in a certain way for a long time, where you have been able to charge these high rates of commission, where you have been able to operate pretty autonomously outside of the law, outside of regulation, legislation. And I think the wider message is that this is actually saying, no, you can't do that anymore. You can't, just because you're super rich and super powerful doesn't mean that you can continue to behave in a way which we deem to be anti-competitive, and harming consumers financially, or foreclosing competition in the market. So I think globally, we hope anyway, it signals that shift, and holding those big companies to account.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be at least a mindset shift on the anti-competitive behavior of the tech. I know it's been a long slog for you, 5 years. So it's a culmination of a lot of work, as you said. So I'm sure it must be a very exciting moment for you. So we're excited to see how this pans out. We're rooting for you. And if anyone wants to get more information, you can visit Rachael at her website, drdigitalhealth.co.uk. It's drdigitalhealth.co.uk. And of course, you can pick up her book, The Digital Health Self, available on Amazon. It's right there behind her. It's got a really cool cover, which I like a lot. I always judge a book by its cover. You're not supposed to, but I do. So Rachael, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your insights on this case. We really appreciate you being here.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.